Section 7. Reporting joint contributions. Absent written instructions to the contrary, a committee must treat a joint contribution as though the individuals participating in the contribution made the contributions separately and itemize them separately on Schedule A as required. See example 13-4. And those other things. For example, if a committee receives a $300 check with 2 signatures but no written attribution, the committee attributes the contribution equally between the donors, $150 to each contributor. Note that the committee must record each contribution according to the rules set out in Chapter 11. Neither contributor has previously contributed to the committee during the year. The committee does not have to itemize either contribution, nor does it have to itemize the $300 total joint contribution. If, on the other hand, the $300 check is accompanied by a signed statement attributing $250 to one individual and $50 to the other, the $250 contribution must be itemized. The $50 contribution is included in the total of unitemized contributions reported on line 11A of the detailed summary page. See also Chapter 4 for more information on joint contributions. As explained in the explanation and justification to revised rules on the contribution limits prescribed April 8th, 1987. Section 8. Reporting redesignation. Oh, there's a picture there you should check out on the last page. Section 8. Reporting redesignations and reattributions. Receipt of original contribution. When itemizing a contribution that must first be redesignated or reattributed before it is legally acceptable, the committee must include a statement on Schedule A noting that the legality of the contribution is in question. Receipt of redesignation or reattribution. The committee must also comply with special procedures when reporting the receipt of reattributions and redesignations of contributions that were originally itemized on previous reports. There is no need to report a reattribution or redesignation if the original contribution was not itemized. On the report covering the period during which the committee received the redesignation or reattribution, the committee must disclose as a memo entry information on both the original contribution and the redesignation or reattribution. The memo entry appears on a Schedule A for the category of contribution involved. For example, a reattribution would appear with other itemized contributions on a Schedule A used for contributions from individuals/persons other than political committees. The first part of the memo entry discloses all the information on the contribution as well as it was originally reported on Schedule A. The second part of the memo entry discloses as a negative entry the amount of the redesignation or reattribution. Alright, there's some footnotes. Redesignations and reattributions are explained in Chapter 4. The procedure detailed in blank and that applies to any contribution that appears to be illegal or that is questionable. As explained in the explanation and justification to revised rules on contribution limits prescribed April 8th, 1987. The second part of the memo entry discloses as negative entry the amount of the redesignation or reattribution. The third part discloses information on the contribution as it was redesignated or reattributed, including the date the redesignation or reattribution was received, and, in case of the redesignation, the election for which the contribution was redesignated. See all that? There's a picture there. Anyway, refund of excessive portion. If a committee requests a redesignation or reattribution but does not receive it within 60 days of the contribution's receipt, the committee must refund the excessive portion of the contribution within 60 days of the treasurer's receipt of the contribution and disclose the refund on its next report. See Section 22 of this chapter. And there's that there. There's another big picture thing here. It's reattributions, free legal and accounting services. These are good little things to look at. You also will just have to fill out these forms. Reporting free legal and accounting services. An unauthorized committee may receive free legal and accounting services. No, I'm sorry, an authorized committee, provided solely to help the committee comply with the Act, as explained in Chapter 7. If the value of services paid by one by one person, the employer, exceeds $200 or aggregates over $200 during an election cycle, the committee must itemize the following information as a memo entry on a separate Schedule A. The name of each employee performing the services, the name and address of the employer of the person providing the services, the amounts paid for the services by the employer, and the dates the services were performed. The Schedule A should be clearly labeled as exempt legal or accounting services. Section 10. Reporting in-kind contributions. There's more forms that you should look at here. Schedules A and B. When determining whether to itemize an in-kind contribution, a committee should treat it the same as a monetary contribution. The only difference is that the amount of the in-kind contribution must also be included in the committee's total operating expenditures in order to avoid inflating cash on hand. An in-kind contribution must be itemized as an operating expenditure on Schedule B only if it has to be itemized as a contribution on Schedule A. For information on how to value an in-kind contribution, see Chapter 3, Section 2. Unreimbursed disbursements by candidates. Campaign expenditures made by the candidate from personal funds that are not to be reimbursed are reported as in-kind contributions from the candidate. If the candidate makes unreimbursed payments on behalf of the committee to a single vendor that exceeds $200 for the election cycle, the committee must identify the ultimate payee, i.e. the vendor, and a separate memo entry on Schedule B. Each memo entry must include the name and address of the vendor to which payment was made, as well as the date, amount, and purpose of the payment. Advances of personal funds. Although an advance of personal funds by an individual to purchase goods and services, with the exceptions of some travel costs, is considered an in-kind contribution, special reporting rules apply if it is to be reimbursed. Anyway, on the previous page, there was a footnote. See interpretive rule on reporting ultimate payees of political committee disbursements. Continuing. There's some more things to look at there on this page. You really have to follow along with this. You can't rightly just listen for this. Special reporting rules apply if it is to be reimbursed. For more information, see the next sections on reporting advances and travel expenses. Reporting appreciated goods as contributions. When a committee receives an in-kind contribution whose value may appreciate over time, such as stock or artwork, special reporting rules apply. 1. Itemizing the initial gift, if necessary, as a memo entry on Schedule A. See when to itemize receipts above. Under Amount, report the fair market value of the contribution on the date the item was received. Do not include that amount in the total for the appropriate contribution line. On the detailed summary page, no itemization on Schedule B is necessary. Once the item is sold, report the sale price as a contribution on the appropriate line if the purchaser is known or as an other receipt. On line 15, if the purchaser is unknown, itemize the transaction on Schedule A. See when to itemize receipts above. Under Amount, report the fair market value of the contribution on the date the item was received. Do not include that amount in the total for the appropriate contribution line. On the detailed summary page, no itemization on Schedule B is necessary. See example 13 through 12, 13-whatever. Once the item is sold, report the sale price as a contribution on the appropriate line if the purchaser is known or as an other receipt on line 15 if the purchaser is unknown. Itemize the transaction on Schedule A if necessary. See example 13-13. Also, if the purchaser is known, the amount of the purchase when aggregated with other contributions by the purchaser must fall within the contribution limits.
Section 11. Reporting recount-related donations and disbursements. There's a little graphic there again. So this Chapter 13 here is very picture-dependent. A federal campaign may establish a recount fund either as a separate bank account of the candidate's authorized committee or as a separate entity. In either case, the receipts and disbursements for recount expenses must be reported on the authorized committee's reports as other receipts and other disbursements. Reporting recount donations. A campaign must include amounts received for a recount and a total for other receipts, recorded on line 15 of the Form 3 detailed summary page, or of the post-election detailed summary page, when filing the post-general report. As illustrated in example 13-14, the campaign must itemize the donation on Schedule A for line 15 if the aggregate receipts from the donor exceed $200 for the election cycle. Reporting recount disbursements. A campaign must include amounts spent on a recount and its total for other disbursements, recorded on line 21 of the Form 3 detailed summary page, or of the post-election detailed summary page when filing the post-general report. As illustrated below, the campaign must itemize the disbursements on Schedule B for line 21 if payments to the same payee aggregate more than $200 for the election cycle. Note, for purposes of aggregation, the election cycle begins the day after the general election. Section 12. Reporting receipt of refunds of contributions made by the committee. Refunds received by a committee for contributions it made to other political committees or candidates should be reported on line 15 of the detailed summary page and itemized on a supporting Schedule A if they aggregate over $200 in an election cycle. Section 13. Reporting reimbursement advances of personal funds, non-travel. As explained in Chapter 7 and in the previous sections, when any individual, including a volunteer, a committee staff member, or the candidate uses his or her personal funds or personal credit to pay a vendor for a campaign expense, and the latter is reimbursed by the committee, special reporting rules apply. Non-travel advances made and reimbursed within the same reporting period. Non-travel advances that are made and reimbursed within the same reporting period are considered contributions and must be reported as follows. Do not report the original advance unless, at the end of the reporting period, the amount of previous contributions in the election cycle from the person making the advance plus the amount of the advance minus the amount of the reimbursement is greater than $200, i.e. previous contributions plus the advance minus the reimbursements over $200. In that case, report the advance as a memo entry contribution on Schedule A, and report the reimbursement as an operating expenditure, and if reimbursements to the person exceed $200 in the election cycle, itemize it on Schedule B with a cross-reference to the memo entry on Schedule A for the advance, if the advance was itemized. If an individual payment on behalf of the committee exceeds $200 in an election cycle to any single vendor, then the committee must identify the ultimate payee, the vendor, in a separate memo entry on Schedule B. There's a footnote. See the interpretive rule on reporting ultimate payees of political committee disbursements. Non-travel advances made and reimbursed in a different reporting period. There's another image here. Non-travel advances that are to be reimbursed in a later reporting period must be reported as follows. Do not report the original travel advance unless at the end of the reporting period in which the advance was made, the amount of previous contributions in the election cycle from the person making the advance plus the amount of the advance minus the amount of the reimbursement is greater than $200, i.e. previous contributions plus the advance minus the reimbursement greater than $200. In that case, report the advance as a memo entry contributions on Schedule A. Report the amount of the advance outstanding at the end of the report period as a debt on Schedule D if it exceeds $500 or has been outstanding for more than 60 days. See example 13-17. And report the reimbursement once made as an operating expenditure. And if reimbursements to that person exceed $200 in the election cycle, itemize it on Schedule B with a cross-reference to the memo entry on Schedule A for the advance, if the advance was itemized. As mentioned above, if an individual's payment on behalf of the committee exceeds $200 in an election cycle to any single vendor, then the committee must identify the ultimate payee, the vendor, in a separate memo entry on Schedule B.